Hi guys, Fog Gaming here and welcome to Star Wars Battlefront 2. Today we will take a closer look at all the graphic settings for Battlefront 2 and we will adjust them so that you can improve your experience while playing this game. In other words, we will be looking for the best settings so that you can have an advantage over everybody else. I will share my PC specs in the video description and I will show you the main components here on screen. In the top left corner you will see the frames per second, which you may use as a reference. These frames are valid if you run Star Wars Battlefront 2 with an Intel Core i7 6900K and a GTX 1080 Ti in 1440p. I'm running this game borderless, dynamic resolution off, DirectX 12 on, VSync off, and I have set the motion blur to 0. This is how the game looks on ultra settings. I chose this scene because it's very easy to spot the differences of all the different graphic settings. There is a wall on the left which is very close to you. There are two statues, a tower, and you can see a tree on the right side together with a detailed shadow on the ground. Basically, you can see various items and objects close by, at medium ranges and at longer ranges. Most of the time the frame rates hover around 100 frames per second, so this makes it easier to compare the different settings. The most drastic change is when you go from ultra to low, so let's compare the differences. The wall on the left has lost a lot of its detail and it looks even darker than before. We lost the shadow of the character, the statues lost even more detail, and there's even a black line running across the leg of the furthest statue. It seems as if the lighting in the tower has been turned off, the trees and the leaves have changed, and if you look at the shadow, then you can see that the leaves now look like a bunch of rectangles. In other words, the game will look darker and less detailed, but we had a massive jump in our frames per second. We went from 100 to 163. Pretty impressive. The picture will improve when you set everything to medium, but your frames per second will drop of course, all the way down to 124. The wall on the left is equally dark. The black line on the statue has jumped over to the other statue, so there is definitely something weird going on over here. The tree in the distance looks a little bit better. The shadows are still blocky, but they blend in nicer with the surrounding terrain and the edges of the objects look more refined. Let's step it up one notch and let's set everything to high. The wall on the left has gained some clarity again, and no more dark shadows that we saw on low and medium. But wait a minute. Are there two black lines on the statues now? Really? This is a very weird anomaly and I have no explanation for this. I presume that it's a bug and I'm sure that they will fix it in the near future. The rest of the statue looks even better than before and somebody has turned the light back on in the tower. The shadows of the leaves now look like the shadows of leaves again. No more blocky parts and the shadows look better overall. As you know, these settings come at a cost and the frames have dropped even further down to 105. When we go back to Ultra, then you can see that the wall on the left has gained some of the finer details back again, the statues finally look normal and the shadows of the tree looks amazing. In total, we only lost 5 frames compared to high. These were drastic changes and we will now fine tune our settings so that we can modify our game so that we can have an advantage over everybody else. The texture quality adjusts the clarity and the quality of textures game wide. If you set the texture quality to low, then your frame rate will stay exactly the same. To make matters worse, I can't see any noticeable difference. I had to use Photoshop to see the smallest change in detail, but you won't be able to tell when you're playing Star Wars Battlefront 2. The same is valid when you set the texture quality to medium, high or ultra. Texture filtering affects the sharpness of textures, and changing this has the same effect as changing the texture quality. In other words, nothing at all. No change in frame rate and there is no visual change. Changing the lighting quality does nothing at all. No frame rate change and no visual change. The shadow quality is a different story. On low it disables dynamic shadows, leaving only shadows cast by fixed static game elements. It will give you an extra 7 frames, but the shadow of the leaves won't look like leaves anymore. Everything will become very blocky and you're almost able to play Tetris with them. A medium setting will still gain you 5 frames and the shadows itself look less blocky, less dark, but it will be more blurry. A high setting will remove most of the blurriness at the cost of 5 frames and ultra looks even better. All the blurry spots are now gone while you keep the same amount of frames as on high. The effects quality has no impact on the frame rate or on the picture in this scene. Post-processing on the other hand can gain you 19 frames by setting it to low. This comes at the cost of sharpness and objects will lose some detail. Medium will bring back a lot of those details, but in that case you will only gain 5 frames. High looks even better of course, but this time there won't be any frame rate gain. Ultra looks even better than high at the same performance level. The mesh quality to low changes a lot, and here is our black line on the statue again, so we found the setting that was causing these issues. This setting was also the reason why the light in the tower was turned off and the trees look as if they lost most of their leaves. If you paid close attention, then you must have noticed that the mesh quality on Ultra produced 97 frames. Now we have 102, so we gained 5 frames. As you know, medium brings a black line over to the other statue and this will cost you 2 frames. On high you will get access to the guy who turns on the light in the tower and it will show you 2 black lines on the statues. Luckily, Ultra will remove all of these issues with the black lines for you. The only thing that the terrain quality changes is the way how some of these tiles are represented. On low and medium you will see perfectly straight and flat tiles. On high there is some variation and on Ultra they look very realistic with variations in height and placement. Terrain ground cover removes the leaves on the ground. In low you won't see any leaves. Medium has a few more leaves, high has even more and Ultra has a lot of leaves. Luckily there is no performance impact. Anti-aliasing off makes the image lose most of its sharpness, but you will gain 4 frames. FXAA low gains 3 frames and it looks slightly better than off. Guess what? FXAA medium looks even better, what a surprise, but this won't gain you any frames. FXAA high and TAA look incredibly similar and I can't tell which one is best, the difference just isn't big enough to notice. Ambient occlusion adds contact shadows where 2 surfaces or objects meet. Unfortunately, ambient occlusion has no effect whatsoever in Battlefront 2, so leave it on Ultra. Motion blur will do exactly that, it will blur the surrounding area when you move, for example. By average you will get a 3 frames per second improvement with motion blur set to off. It speaks for itself that you should try to limit the amount of blur that you see. There is one more thing that you can do, and this will dramatically change the frames per second and also the visual clarity of the game itself. You can change the resolution scale. The effect of this is enormous. The resolution scale will make your GPU render the image exactly at the resolution you've set if you leave it at 100%. If you decrease the resolution scale to 75%, then the game will tell the GPU that it only needs an image that's 75% of the original image. The opposite is called supersampling. The GPU now calculates more pixels and then it scales them down to a lower resolution. This means getting a better picture. Lower this to 25% and you're going to have a very hard time with accurately shooting at your enemies, but you're going to see 133 frames per second. If you change this to 200%, then you're going to see an enormously detailed picture, but you will only get 34 frames per second. A more realistic setting would be 125%. You will get a better image and you will still get 70 frames per second. I did try to change the HUD scale to 0%, but the map is already small enough, so better leave it at 100. If we could change the other items separately, then sure, it would make sense, but we could all benefit from a bigger map, so it's best not to make it smaller. There are 2 possible settings that we can now use depending on your PC and your personal playstyle. The first settings are for a die-hard, hardcore gamer who only wants the highest number of frames per second while having a playable game without putting yourself at a disadvantage. If you are a player like this, then set the shadow quality to low for an extra 7 frames. The post-processing can give you 19 frames by setting it to low. FXAA on low for 3 frames. Now, you could set this to off, but the 2 extra frames aren't worth it. Last but not least, set the motion blur to off for another 3 frames. These are the things that you have to change, but the following settings should be kept to ultra. Those are texture quality, texture filtering, lighting quality, effects quality, mesh quality, terrain ground cover and ambient occlusion. If you want optimal settings, which are a mix of both, so better frames but still a good image to look at, then keep the same settings on ultra but change the shadow quality to medium for 5 frames, the post-processing to medium for another 5 frames, select TAA and select motion blur to off. I will recommend you to play the game once or twice with everything on ultra if your PC can handle it. Then change it to the die-hard settings and then try the optimal settings. Try to get an idea of what works best for your PC and for your own personal playstyle. The die-hard settings will give you an extra 32 frames per second and the optimal settings will win you 13 frames per second. By the way guys, the YouTube likes and shares are very helpful to me. If you think that this video is worthy, would you mind taking a moment to like this video and to share it with all your buddies? This was Fog of Gaming, thanks for watching and I will see you in Battlefront.